My family and I recently went on a vacation to the Breckenridge, Colorado area. If you're not familiar with it, there are tons of awesome climbs and hikes to do in that city. It's awesome to be in that type of weather, especially this time of year, August 2026, as of the recording of this episode. And for me, it was a big deal because I do this thing called mountain movement with a bunch of other guys. And every year the cohorts are a little bit different, but most of the time it is just a group of guys that have gone on previous mountain movement cohorts. And we all get together, and for about 90 days, we go through these different phases to make ourselves better as a group of men. And last year, as a part of our trip, we went up to the Breckenridge, Colorado area. And, you know, went on a 14er. It was my first 14,000 foot mountain climb. Realistically, you do about, 3 to 4,000 feet elevation change. Some 14ers start even lower where you park your car and then go up. But either way, if you're a flatlander like me here in Kansas, operating at around, 1,143 feet, going up to 14,000 feet is quite an elevation change. In fact, the whole Breckenridge area hovers around 8,000, 9,000 feet. So when you go up there, you're already adapting to that sort of climate. But last year, we went on my first 14er climb, and I did it about 50 to 60 pounds heavier and definitely felt it, and it was brutal. And as we were gearing up this year in this year's evolution of mountain movement, I was preparing for this trip, and there was something one of my buddies said as he was on vacation. This was back in February. He was smart. He went to the coasts, to California, where I'm from, and was doing his check-in, his weekly mountain movement check-in, and got tears in his eyes as he was describing the looks on his kids' faces as they got to experience the ocean for the first time. And there was a moment where I was really inspired, and I thought, you know what, this year I should probably book a trip to the same area, same weekend, same time frame in the summer with my family, because my daughters have not seen the mountains yet. And then that crazy idea, as I was starting to riff with my wife about it, we were talking about, well, what if we took them on a moderately difficult climb and spent, a week or less up there in that Breckenridge area? And so we did that this last weekend. We went up, took my kids out on their first hike, and it was, for those of you who geek out on the trails, it was the Summit County Trail going to the lower and upper Mohawk Lakes. So the trip starts, you park and you walk through about 2 or 3 miles of woods, and then you get to the mountain and you start actually going up a bunch of switchbacks, climbing over rocks. It had rained a lot, so it was really slippery and really muddy. But for my kids, this was their first time, packing everything in with their camelbacks, having to pee in the woods for the first time in their life, having to deal with mosquitoes, having to look out for bears. I had my bear spray with me. Don't worry, dads. And for those of you who know me really well, you know what code is for bear spray. And we basically hiked up to the lower lake, which was about a 1,800 foot elevation change. We were already hovering around 9,000 in that Keystone Breckenridge area. And they did it. They got up to the top. We sat at the lower lake, ate our snacks, and then went down. And I was so proud of my girls because they tripped and slipped and fell and needed help getting up some of the rocks during the climb, but they handled it so well, and they were so grateful for the experience. And, there's those moments as a parent where you know that you're doing a good job in certain areas when you see what your kids do without you asking them. And so one of those moments was when we were coming down, my daughters were saying hello, greeting all the hikers that were going up, and said, "Hey, you're almost there," or "It's hard, but it's worth it. Hey, you're doing great." They were just encouraging people on the way up. And I just thought that was so cool because they were both really tired. They were moderately exhausted. Both of them actually had minor injuries to their knees when they fell. One of them got a cut, and we had to put a Band-Aid on it on the way down. But I was so proud of my daughters. The rest of the vacation was great. The most memorable moment, though, was not going up on the mountain. It was actually, there was two things. One of them was playing hide and seek in the Airbnb, which was great because my daughters got to see how tactful I am and how much of a master I am at hide and seek. When it was my turn to hide, and I just went outside. And I was nowhere in the house. And I gave them 2 minutes to find me. And of course, one of my kids said that was cheating afterward. The other one got inspired and said, hey, let's play again. But that was really fun. And then there was this moment on the last night we were there. We were sitting out on the back porch, which we were in an Airbnb, second level. And it overlooked this entire valley with all these trees and ski lifts and stuff. And it was just beautiful. And the sun's going down. My daughter had picked up a slingshot at one of the local gift shops. And we didn't have any shot to shoot out with this thing. And so what we did was we started looking through all of our different trail mix. And there's this one nut that was pretty hefty in size and wasn't the best piece in the trail mix, and started launching those nuts from my daughter's slingshot into, or trying to hit, the pond that was about 50 feet across. And I was nailing the water. My 9-year-old hit the water a few times, but we're just sitting there for an hour. And the time passed so quickly, but it was so beautiful just having us all try the slingshot and have that moment. And so, oddly enough, the mountain climb and all that stuff, that was a great highlight, but the slingshot was the one that stuck with me and will probably stick with me forever, especially because I'm recording it right now. And I'm going to get back to this story. I promise that it connects to the main message, but this episode is about midlife crisis. Midlife crises, plural. Midlife crisis, for my younger viewers who haven't heard that term yet, was popularized, I think, before the 2000s. And it was basically a term that people came up with for, folks who in their 40s or 50s bought a motorcycle after never riding one, or got their first tattoo, got their ears pierced, dyed their hair for the first time, or decided to start a business and leave corporate America. And people would dismiss that or categorize that and say, whoa, is that a midlife crisis? Because it's very common when you get into your 40s, and some folks it sets on earlier, to have a sort of crisis of your being or a crisis of your reality. This is when we see a lot of people do things that we never expected them to do. And we just kind of say, oh, maybe that's their midlife crisis. And we always talk about it. Typically, we did when we were younger. And as Stephanie and I were approaching this age, this season in our life where we're getting a little bit older, as one midlife crisis. I've told people often that I've had multiple midlife crises, plural. Things like, getting laid off and starting my own business, starting this podcast after never doing anything like either of those two things up to that point in my life. I've gone through rapid weight loss. I started jujitsu in my 40s, right? Like things that people look at and they go, oh man, that Michael's at it again. He's got that midlife crisis. I recently picked back up all my guitars and started writing new music again. And hopefully I'll get an album out within the next few months that'll see the light of day, because I got a lot of stuff that I did as a kid where I was, playing guitar a lot, and I was in a band and we were signed and we toured and all that stuff. And those are things people usually hang the hat on, but I'm reviving those things. So I've had a new midlife crisis, arise from that longing to be a creator again. And this podcast has really inspired a lot of that too. But the midlife crisis thing, one of my friends just recently posted that they were going for their first marathon and basically asked the question, is this my midlife crisis? And it's kind of rhetorical because they're going to do the marathon anyway. But it got me really thinking about this, about the midlife crises that have led me to this point in my life. And so, if we talk about that, if we unpack that a little bit more, like my jujitsu, absolutely a midlife crisis, realizing that I was fat, untrained, and if somebody wanted to take advantage of me or my family, there wasn't a damn thing that I could do about it. And, even going into being like a person who carries pocket knives, occasionally guns, concealed carry, all that stuff. There's always that question, or there should be for you guys who are into that stuff and don't train, is, well, what do I do without my tools? What do I do if I'm in a position? What do I do if I'm in my underwear? What do I do if I'm, out in public and I'm not armed? Who's the weapon at that point? Who am I counting on to protect me, protect my family, whomever? And there's a crisis there that happened with me. And I thought, man, my health is bad. I'm getting all these signals, right? Like my blood pressure's high. Doctors are recommending blood pressure meds. I couldn't tie my shoes without breathing heavily. If there was an elevator, I would never take the stairs at work. I'm starting to see all this stuff sort of come up in my life where, I was in need of radical change. And I think that is where the root or the cause of midlife crises lie, is they are in this moment where we realize I've got to change something. And the thing that I'm reaching for, that will offer me some relief or offer me some change that I'm seeking. Sometimes we go to a midlife crisis, and the midlife crisis and the thing that we embrace, the new thing we embrace, just becomes a new distraction, right? Like that motorcycle, that might be a distraction from whatever is paining you in your life that's creating that lashing out or that reaching out for change, right? Some things are just to medicate. A midlife crisis could be, medicating something that we're not addressing, right? Like buying things, hoping that they'll fill that hole that I've said only God can fill, right? Or that change can only fill. I have the Kaizen logo, those kanji characters, the Japanese thing that's behind me in white, that means Kaizen. It means change for the better. That came from my lean background, right? And so I have to evaluate every time I'm making a change in my life. Is this going to bring good change, or is it just a facade that I think will create change, but will actually just continue to medicate the problem that I'm trying to solve? And so what I chose in my 40s was to make sure that I beat morbid obesity again, to make sure that I found something to be creative with again. That's where this podcast came from. To make sure when I had kids, because we had kids later in life, Stephanie and I have both, we've talked about it on numerous other podcasts. Stephanie's talked about it on her Motherhood in America podcast. She's even talked about it here on this show the couple times that she's been on. But where we started to really think about this was when we had kids. And so for me, I continue to think about, like, what do my midlife crises, what do they say to my children? Okay. Does this bring them closer to me? Does this bring me closer to them? Does this bring us all closer to God? Does this create the life that we're building, that future state that we want? And so that is a fundamental question everybody who's considering making a radical change, like losing weight or going for that motorcycle or going for that guitar, or, getting into some new health trend or getting into some new gym or martial art or whatever, needs to ask, like, what is going to be the end result of this, right? And so for me, what was really lacking in my life was other people that were going to see me for who I was, see me for what I was, and challenge me to do better. I get that out of my micro church network, Kansas City Underground Shout, had Rod Wegner on the show before. I get that from my jiu-jitsu bros. And in some cases, the jiu-jitsu ladies as well, because our gym has quite a few women who train. And so I'm learning, I'll learn from the kids class. I'll see something that happens in the kids jiu-jitsu class that my kids go to. And I go, man, that's really cool. That got me to think about something different. But, I started to purposefully put myself in positions where I knew I couldn't lie to myself. I couldn't lie to other people anymore. And the only choice was to, in this midlife crisis, get better, right? Or learn something new, get closer to God, whatever it is. And so that's my challenge to everybody. First off, don't consider it a midlife crisis. We don't just have one. I would argue that we have multiple midlife crises. The longer we live, the more crises we're going to go through. And the other one is to just really make sure that if it's a midlife crisis, it's a perfectly good midlife crisis. It's something that you can use to make yourself become the target condition human you want to be. There was an author, one point, he said, never waste a perfectly good crisis. I would expand on that and say, never waste a perfectly good midlife crisis. All right. That's where it brings me all back full circle to this family vacation. Okay. I would not have been able to guide my daughters and my wife up that mountain had I not done it myself. Sure, I camped in the mountains, I roughed it, I backpacked when I was a kid, but it had been a long time since I had done any of that. So when I went last year to Quandary, that was a huge testing of my physical, mental, and spiritual fortitude, right? I did things to prepare myself for that, but nothing could have prepared me for that altitude. And so I went through a lot. I wanted to quit multiple times, but I faced it because I realized there was more riding on the line than me just getting up to that mountain. I was going to be there with my buddies. I had told everybody back at home that I was taking on my first 14er. Had plenty of naysayers, people going, oh, you've never done one before? Oh, well, what about the altitude? Well, okay, well, stop talking like you're going to get to the top of the mountain. Somebody literally told me that, right? Super encouraging people sometimes that we come in contact with in life. Huge sarcasm there. But I realized that it was time to take them. I had done it myself, and I wasn't going to ask them to do anything I wasn't willing to do myself either. And so I had that midlife crisis, and then, multiple midlife crises between last July and this July, and embracing those crises and allowing them to make me better as a man and a follower of Christ, and better jiu-jitsu practitioner, better podcaster, better business leader, all that stuff. That is what prepared me to take my daughters up that mountain and have that experience with them. So for some of you, you actually need a midlife crisis. Maybe you've been seeking comfort for way too long. Maybe it's time that you actually had a crisis of your being, or a spiritual crisis, or a physical crisis, or a health scare, a mental health scare, whatever. Some of you, that's exactly what you need right now in your life. You need a crisis. You need something to scare the living daylights out of you and force change. That moment that you decide to embrace it, on the other side of that, that is the change that you needed. Provided you're not medicating, provided you're not making the symptom go further. But some of you, midlife crisis, that's exactly what you need. I needed a midlife crisis with my heart rate, my blood pressure, my morbid obesity, which I've now defeated 4 times, by the way. Lost 48 pounds since March of this year. The radical change, embracing new things that I had previously dismissed or shunned or said I never would do that. I've done things with my diet. I've done things with physical activity. Getting my butt kicked in the Jiu-Jitsu Academy forced me to say, the only way I'm going to get better is if my body gets better. If I get stronger, if I get more flexible, if I start getting better sleep, all of that stuff. All of those midlife crises, those moments where I thought, man, this really sucks. It sucks that I've allowed myself to get to this point. Those were all factors and change agents for change. And so I would encourage you, as we close this episode, what is something that you need to change right now? What is a midlife crisis that might be coming upon you? What's a recent midlife crisis that you experienced this year? And where is or was the lesson in that? I think you need a midlife crisis. I think you need multiple midlife crises. I really appreciate you all. If you got thoughts, drop them in the comments, send them to me, DM me, text me if you got my number, and I'd love to hear from you. Maybe this is a topic that we can expand upon in the future, or have a guest on to talk about this topic of midlife crises or MLCs exclusively. Thanks for tuning in. Hang in there for the next one. We're getting closer to 100 episodes. I can't wait to see what the Lord and what others do with this podcast coming up in the future. Appreciate you all.